extremely disingenuous saying like that this building is not important and significant to the community. I think that's obvious. I think it invokes memories, I'm sure, of weddings, funerals, births, baptisms, I mean, so much. And so I'm not going to stand here and talk about that. But what I am going to talk about are some cold, hard facts and truth and realities. First, to reiterate again, because it was mentioned, Holy Name of Jesus Parish is the owner of St. Laurentius.
Can I?
Why?
This needs to be done for the record. We object that there's an entity of Holy Name Parish that owns this property.
Right.
If you look at the deed, it does not say anything about Holy Name Parish.
Until this seems like
Vote them out.
The building has been relegated to profane but not sordid use, and not be used as a Catholic church today. It has been vacant for over a year. So
Why?
Hey, wait, you know, no one, everyone gave everyone else a chance.
So it is a vacant property, and it has been a vacant property. And a recommendation to designate it historic is the first step in going down the line of another Church of the Assumption, and that is just a reality. There are public safety issues, and there are issues relating to the condition of the building, and that is relevant because for a number of reasons. One, if something were to, the building were to collapse, how does that serve the public? How does that serve the community other than create a public interest? However, I am not saying that there is an imminent danger of collapse. None of the engineers have said that, with the exception of Rich Ortega, who was retained by Save St. Laurentius, who said that it is in imminent danger of a sudden collapse that could be a catastrophic event. That is within his report on page 9 within the materials I submitted. What the city of Philadelphia has said on numerous occasions, most recently on May 11th when they issued a final violation notice under section 307, is that the property in the building is unsafe. And so there have been engineers who have come out to look at the building, and this all started with a facade study. And just looking at the facade, it looked like between $475,000 to $750,000 in repairs would be needed. But when the contractors got up and started taking off some of the brownstone, they had to stop because the structural integrity was being compromised. And so Nick Sinali right now will discuss what O'Donnell Nacarado has done and what their opinions have been, and then I will also mention why that is relevant from a historical standpoint.
Thank you. Once again, my name is Nick Sinali, and I'd like to stand so that everybody can see me. Nick Sinali, and I am with the engineering firm in Philadelphia of O'Donnell and Nacarado. I was president of the firm up to about a year ago. I am now president emeritus, which I don't know exactly what that means. What I'd like to do, if I could, in a very concise way, explain what our engagement was all about, what we did as a result of it, and what we found as a result of it, and then what eventually we recommended as a result of it. And I promise that I will make that as short as possible. The reason we were asked by the Archdiocese, or commissioned by the Archdiocese, to review the St. Laurentius building was simply for the Archdiocese to comply with the Philadelphia statute for building facades. And the building, and as you may or may not know, Philadelphia adopted a facade ordinance in 2010 and required every building of a certain, within a certain, that met a certain criteria to be reviewed by qualified entities for for safety of facade, which means, what that really means is make sure that there are no components of the facade that are dislodging, that could fall, and obviously the purpose of it is for the safeguard of the pedestrians. So in late 2013 is when we were asked to do that, and we did. We have a group within our company that does just that, facade reviews. Our first review resulted in findings, and again, I'm only talking exterior now, not interior at all. Our findings were that the exterior stone was in fact deteriorated in many places. It was either laminating or cracked, and in some places they were laminated in such a way that would dislodge fairly quickly. Okay, they were in various state of dislodgement. Now, not of the whole stone necessarily, but pieces of the stone, the front pieces of it. So as a result of that, and that has nothing to do with the structural integrity of the whole building.
I want to ask a quick question.
Sure.
Is this a brick structure with a stone?
It's stone, it's 2 feet thick stone.
Oh, it's solid stone.
Yeah. It's brownstone on the outside, schist on the inside. Rubble, mica, schist, rubble on the inside. And the exterior stone is keyed in, you know, with header stones at some interval. So when we found that, and I digress a little bit, but as the engineer entity doing the inspection, immediately become liable for the safety of the public. Because if we see something that could potentially hurt a pedestrian, we need to react to that immediately. And it wasn't just in one area. So as a result of that, we were obligated by law to contact LNI, which we did. And LNI issued a report, no, a citation, I think it was, later on that year. And then subsequent to that, again, to make it short, what happened is in the front of the building, the north elevation, where many was so potentially dangerous to us that we become liable for the building. You have to remember, it's on my shoulders. I'm the structural engineer of record. I have a seal, and if, God forbid, any of your children, which I don't want ever to happen, would be hurt there as a result of a piece of that stone falling, I would be ultimately liable for it.
You would be, or they own through owners' neglect.
The owners would first be sued by that entity, and then the owners would immediately go to me and say, "Why didn't you tell us about it?" Okay, and that's just the way. I don't like it, but that's the way the legal system works. And so and as a professional, any professional here will tell you, my first obligation as a structural engineer is not even necessarily to my client. It's to the safety of the public. That's my first.
I have a question.
We could let him finish.
Okay.
Okay. So anyway, we once we found that issue, we recommended that sidewalk protection be erected, and again, you know, for the reasons I just stated. So we knew we had an issue. Then within our company, we also have another group that does what we call the owner's rep or construction management. And the Archdiocese, he asked us to take a shot and ask and figure out in round numbers, in engineering estimate, not in contractor estimate, but in engineering estimates, how much it would cost in what universe are we to stabilize what you see. Now, stabilize doesn't necessarily mean a repair. Stabilize means make it so that it's safe today. Okay? So we did that, and you may probably, from what I heard today, many people don't have those reports. Okay, we did that, and we came up with an estimate of roughly $500,000 to $700,000, which is very much in concert with what Richard Ortega said in his report. Totally independent of us. Then whilst we were doing that, we began to suspect, based on what we had seen, deeper problems. What do I mean by that? Problems that you can't see beyond the stone. Because it's very easy to walk through, any engineer can do that. You can walk around and look at the outside of the building by the stone that you see. By many times, what is much more important from a structural standpoint, again, not in the sense of building collapse, but just in the sense of stability of the stone. Okay? What's happening behind it? Because typically you don't just put a stone wall that's 4 inches thick and go up, 60 feet and expect it to stay there, because it's not going to. You have to hold it back with something. And the way this building, this church was built, like any other building, is that the stones were laid, and then occasionally, every once in a while, one of those stones was turned 90 degrees, okay, and embedded into the backup stone. And that's what holds that exterior stone together. So we suspected that there may be issues like that because we had seen some bulging of the stone. So the Archdiocese at that time asked us to explore it a little bit further. So we did. We brought a contractor out there, and we removed some sections to take a look to see in what condition those header stones. We did it in 2 or 3 places, and every place we looked at, the header stone was either disengaged, meaning it could move. Okay, it wasn't embedded totally, or it was sheared at the plane, at the intersection phase between the phase stone and the backup stone. So that concerned us, obviously, because that means that the face stone is not being stabilized the way it was originally intended. That resulted us into in the Archdiocese asking us to further explore that, or actually to just simply to make a recommendation. Now that you know this, what can we do? And we came up with a report, I think, that everybody has seen or may have seen, and it basically says, well, you have a lot of options. One option is to just fix it. Take as much money as you need and fix the building. So, and that would cost you X. If you don't have that kind of money, because that's what they asked, they said to us, give us a menu so that we can analyze it all and make a decision given all those recommendations. The second option was to say, well, maybe you want to just remove the towers, because they're the ones that are in probably the worst shape of the whole structure, and remove them down to building level and then close that area up and reuse the whole building. Or maybe if you think that you can raise enough money to do all this work sometime down the road and not necessarily today, then maybe you just want to stabilize the towers, in a non-architectural way for some period of time, fix the lower problems now, and then as you raise the money, you can fix go back and repair the tower. And then the very last option is what everybody focused on, and then I became the bad guy. But everybody focused on, well, if you can't do any of these, then maybe the thing to do is remove the building. And that's going to cost you X. So we never, as as engineers, never ever recommended simple, concise, without anything else, demolish the building. Never. And we would never do that. That's not, we're professionals. We just simply do what we're asked. And that's all we did. I'm an engineer. I have no architectural, our reports have no architectural considerations because that wasn't our charge. Our charge was, tell me what's wrong with this building. First of all, is the building compliant with the city facade code? And once we said, well, it's not, then what do? Okay? There was no question. No one ever said to me, what do you think about the architecture? Because I would have said at that time, and I'll be very frank with you, go find somebody else because we don't do that.
I just want to follow up with a couple things. After you did the facade, did you do further investigations and studies of the building? after the facade report.
Oh, yes, yeah, I said that. We actually brought a contractor and started to remove some of the stones.
Right.
And then eventually, the last thing we did is, we had difficulty accessing the West Tower because it had been closed for 10 or 15 years. And I wanted, personally, I wanted to, and I'm being extremely open and telling you the truth. What I wanted to do is I didn't want to write a final report without seeing the inside, because all of the assumptions that we had made at that time were using the East Tower visuals. So I made sure that, and one of our inspectors went there, and she needed to be here today, but she couldn't do it for other reasons. And she had to wear hazmat suits to go in here, because it's not, first of all, it was bad from that standpoint. But there are many components of that tower that are, you know, there's big, large cracks. And she said the day that she was in there, there was water running on the inside, just like rivers, because it was raining outside.
You said there were 4 options, right?
Yes.
And the first option was the complete restoration
Just
of
fix it.
the entire building.
Yes.
And that, what did that come to? 2.5 to 3.5 million, was it?
Roughly, yes. And again, that is, I want to qualify, that's an engineering's opinion of cost. That's not an estimate.
Right.
A contractor gives you an
Why
estimate.
there's such a large range?
Yeah, exactly, because we're guessing. And the other thing is, the other reason, it's an educated guess, okay, uneducated, based on experience with other buildings. And the range comes into play is, well, how do we know where all the problems are if we can't see them? And, you know, we have a suspicion they're there, but we don't know that they're really there.
Nick, the second option was knocking down the towers and then repairing and restoring the rest of the building, and that
Correct.
was approximately 2 million?
Rough, yes.
Okay. And that wouldn't be an option, of course, if it's designated.
Right.
Option 3 was just structural stabilization
Of the tower.
of the towers. And what would that look like from an aesthetic standpoint? What would the building look like when you had to do that?
Well, there are engineers in the room, I mean, there are architects in the room, so I don't think I'm gonna talk, they're gonna throw tomatoes at me.
Let's say what it would look like from an aesthetic
Well,
standpoint.
what I was envisioning when we were talking is most likely, netting the tower with some kind of either chain link fence or very strong materials, fabrics, or strapping it, you know, with metal straps. Okay, not architecture. I said that before. This would be simply to hold that tower so that it would be safe temporarily.
And that you'd be like a 20. That project would be a 20-year shelf life.
You could probably stretch it. Well, any option that I give says X number of years, but that doesn't mean that you don't have to do maintenance every year, every day from the day you start. You have to maintain the building every day. Even though, if I say 20 years from, you know, that strapping is gonna be good for 20 years, it still means you gotta climb up that tower every 6 months, I would. You know, look at it and do whatever maintenance it needs to maintain it that way.
And that estimate was 1.2 to 1.7 million.
Correct.
And then the demolition estimate was 1
It was an
million.
opinion of cost.
Excuse me.
Okay.
The engineering opinion of cost was
Yes.
1.2 to 1.7 million.
Yes.
And then for demolition, the engineering opinion of cost was approximately 1 million.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, that wasn't, the 1 million is a real number. It's a bid from a contractor.
Okay.
Even though we had estimated it as an opinion of cost to be roughly that, and then we found out, we had a contractor look at it, and that's roughly what he priced it.
Okay.
So, one observation.
I'm sorry, I wanted to make sure.
One observation. Your observation concerning what the historical commission would do or wouldn't do, for example, in taking off the towers for safety but allowing more civilians. That's premature, because the historical commission may allow a lot of remedies for historic structures, and we don't know what that will be.
So without the towers, though, then it was a $2 million estimate.
I'm just saying, we don't know what the historical.
Prior to going back to the other folks who want to speak, you said that you were going to explain why this is relevant.
Yes, so there are two issues. One is the physical condition of the building, and this goes back to the architectural and historic significance. If the building cannot be maintained, if the building is in a deteriorating state, that creates a public safety issue, and that also compromises the integrity from an aesthetic standpoint of the building. If there are brownstone crumbling and falling to the ground, there is an issue with that. And I understand that you're looking at the technical merits. I appreciate that and understand that. However, if the technical merits cannot take paramount concern over the public safety. And the other reason was because the $1.2 to $1.7 million engineering opinion of cost to stabilize the building now would result in scaffolding. There would be a chain link fence around towers, and now does that fulfill your criteria of what you are trying to achieve in terms of the historic significance of the building, where you have a building that has a chain link fence around it?
But the building could be restored for a certain unspecified period.
For a $2.5 to $3.5 million cost, of which we have a parish that has $50,000 in an operating account.
That is a financial hardship question.
Right, but it's a reality.
It's not a designation.
Right.
It's not a designation question. Okay, so now there are obviously lots of people who want to ask a question. Hold on one second. Okay. All right, if you want to ask a question, then you will go first, and then we can go around the room again. Because there are other people.
It's more of a legal question because this man posed a legal question. You were in there in October of 2013. That's when this all occurred,
Yes.
right? And you yourself, to protect yourself, told the Archdiocese that this needed
we
to be
told the city.
fixed. Okay, the city. And your client's the Archdiocese, right? Who's paying your bill?
My client is the Archdiocese.
Okay, the Archdiocese, not the Holy Name Parish, right? Okay. So we get that clear.
No, I'm sorry. It is the Holy Name.
Is this relevant to the historic
The question
significance
is
of the
this.
building?
This man is telling us how dangerous it is. I'm just asking, what has been done to make it safe since you got there?
The sidewalk protection was installed.
Nothing.
Wasn't the sidewalk
no.
protection installed to allow people to attend mass solely for that reason? Because it's only around the entrance to the church, right?
You're asking me a question and answering it at the same time.
Okay.
It's very hard for me to even address it. Ask me a question, I'll answer it.
Okay, isn't the sidewalk protection solely placed in front of the entrance and egress of the church? Specifically just the church?
The sidewalk protection, okay, and first of all, it's a misnomer. It's not a sidewalk protection. It's protection of people walking the sidewalk. And it was installed there because that's the area of concern that in 2013 we saw as being a dangerous area for anybody to be walking on. So typically what happens is when you see those areas, you install those sidewalk protection temporarily.
Okay, there's no danger for anyone who's walking on Memphis Street. It's only on Burke Street. Is that the ground?
At that time, that's a decision we made because we had you have to remember, we had no idea how long the process would take. Right? Frankly, I'm going to say something else that is going to probably happen very quickly. And again, please, ladies and gentlemen, I have no desire to not save this building. All I am is an engineer, okay? And I love that church. I walked in and I think it's a great place. But my responsibility, thank you very much. Okay, thanks. My responsibility is to the general public safety, period. And that's all I'm trying to accomplish here. So, at the time, we felt that just the protection in front of the church would be appropriate. As time go on, and frankly, I have many times expressed concern over the whole area. Now, as time goes on and the deterioration of the stone gets further worse. So, in very short order, and I told the father and the attorney that in very short order, I'm going to be requesting that the whole perimeter of the building be surrounded by a fencing, because I wouldn't like to see anyone walking close to the building and have something to slide. And again, now, please, ladies and gentlemen, please listen to me. I'm not talking about a big block this big. Okay, it could be something this big. Okay, just a little piece of stone that dislodges from it, and all of you should walk there and see, because you're going to find them. They're going to be there. Okay, well, let's go. Okay, that's your opinion, and we can go together, and I'll show them to you.
I'll climb up there.
No, you
Let me
can see
inside
them.
too.
All right. Well, I'm going to recommend that the fencing be installed. I'm the one that's responsible. If there's anyone else, any other person in this world that wishes to relieve me of my duty, okay, and take on the liability of the pedestrians around the building, please do so. I'll be happy to relinquish it.
But how are you liable if you told them to do it?
I've been in this business for 40 years.
Mr. Sinali, all right? There were 4 proposals recommended by Mr. Sinali, all of which had an economic cost attached to it. The parish, there was a demolition permit that has been submitted because there are consistent L&I violations that are being received and threats of fines and penalties. That is on hold right now while we are before the committee and then the commission. So that can address the question of what is being done. That's the answer.
A demolition permit for what? The whole structure or just part?
For the entire former church building.
So you weren't gonna look at just the towers?
No, we're not gonna look at just, there was no idea to look at just the towers. That estimate was at $2 million,
So you
including the stabilization.
that you can raise $1 million?
To raise $1 million, it's less than having to raise 1.2 or 2. No, and Father John is here to talk about what the plan was, because that was right now that was for a playground for.
That old horse.
Can I just ask
All right,
you
hey,
a
well,
question?
no.
Father John was here to speak about, from a property owner standpoint, the building, the condition, and 2 things that need to be addressed, specifically the nomination petition. One I just spoke of, and that's that the structural issues are being addressed. They are not being addressed because of a financial issue. But the other is that Mr. Weissard, it's a fantastic presentation, but there are serious inaccuracies when he says that the building is in excellent condition and that it has been immaculately maintained over the years. And that simply is not true, and that is on the nomination. And Father John can speak to the maintenance of the building over the years in reference to that.
Okay, hey, no, hold on. We went around the room and everyone got a chance to speak. You were going to get chances to speak, so I think you can allow Father John to speak. Right?
Stand up.
When I came to the parish July 1st last year, I inherited 3 piles of papers, over 2 feet, with the history of the parish. In there was a project. It was phase 1 and phase 2 repair of St. Laurentius, the walls and the tower. It was with a construction firm in Jenkintown. They completed phase 1, and then it shows that by the time they got to the end of phase 1, they had no money and there was no contract signed for phase 2. It's the deferred maintenance, and he said, I'll just defer that. And that was back in the early 60s. Also in the early 60s, the bell firm that put the bell, There was roughly 3.5 tons of bronze on top of one of those towers. And they had to stop ringing the bell because they were warned by the engineers from the bell company, if you do it, the towers can't take the stress. That was in the late 50s, early 60s. What Father did was he just said, look, if somebody in the neighborhood complained about the bells, we're not going to ring them anymore. But you cannot have 4,300 pounds of bronze swinging around in a tower that has needed repair but not repaired. I'm sorry to say that what's happened now, today, is the result of deferred maintenance. You just cannot put maintenance off. David, you were very right when you said, you quoted Lincoln, a nation divided cannot survive. This is a parish divided. 21 doors separate the two churches. 21 doorways. And now, if we're divided, we will not survive. You are very, very right. Thank you for saying
I was
that.
referring to the Archdiocese itself, which in my view must take responsibility for this and see the historic, architectural, and urbanistic importance of this church. I know the parish itself cannot afford it, but I think the Archdiocese must establish a new paradigm and come to the rescue of these very important churches throughout this region or throughout the Archdiocese. And so we a shift in their point of view, but I think that's what's needed. And this is not going to be the last instance of a church that's going to have to be saved. Thank you.
Are you? Okay, so the following comments are going to be responding to the presentation and, okay.
I have a comment about Father's point.
Okay, we'll start there and then go this way around the room. Is that okay?
Father Simon was relocated to St. Laurentius, Holy Name Parish. There was a previous pastor, Father Zingaro, who would not carry out the Archdiocesan mission of destroying this church. He was removed in June of 2014. Father Simon took over in July of 2014, and immediately the gung-ho pedal to the metal to demolish the church began. That is where we're at. So this was not always the mission of the parish to destroy this church. It may have been a mission of 4 or 5 people, but not the parish.
Can I respond since I'm pastor of that parish? It was. He was not following what he was asked to do.
Right.
That's right.
All right.
I would just like to respectfully bring to the committee's attention, this has nothing to do with this hearing, but just so you know where we are with the canonical law process. Our recourse, we still have not gotten the result from or the word back, but the Archdiocese said it was denied. If it was denied, the paperwork is pending. Nonetheless, we filed an appeal with the Vatican Supreme Court, at which that's where we are at the level of Rome. So that process may take a year to 2 years to complete. So that is where I met with our canon lawyer last night at Various Street Station. He wasn't able to be here today. Just so you're aware that that piece is in the mix with the processes through the Catholic Church.
What was the proposition that was developed?
The proposition was to reverse the recourse, the sanctifying or the consecrating St. Laurentius, to reopen it as a worship site. We do not know the reasons why it was denied yet. We didn't get that paperwork back.
We know that this may never return to be a church because of the vindictive nature of what has occurred here. However, we are trying to preserve this structure for our community for longer than they would like to do so. This is, there could be an adaptive reuse to this church, and we are fully for that. We know it may never be a church again, and if that's their decision.
So, yeah.
I'm just very concerned that the purpose of this hearing has gone severely off course. As a committee, based on what you hear today, you will be making a recommendation for whether or not this church, this building, should be designated as historic. Does the issue of nebulous ownership or does the issue of the physical condition of the building factor into your decision-making process.
I'd like to just say something to that. So this is obviously the Historic Designation Committee. The purpose is to is not only to make some sort of recommendation regarding the historic significance of any property or object or interior, but of course also all of this comes into minutes that go to the Historic Commission. So this is, I think, the primary or one of the primary sources of information for the consideration of the commission, including, of course, the testimony of the commission and the original nomination.
So, Mr. Chairman, are you supposed to consider what my colleague from O'Donnell Nacarado stated, that his license is on the hook if the remedies are not taken? This is the, speaking as an architect, I have seen all too many neglect by owner as a strategy to diminish heritage, cultural heritage in this city. And I certainly hope that my colleague architect here, who just spoke, made the issue that you are historical committee. You really rule on technical merit and historical aspect of the property. Let LNI deal with public safety. And I take exception to dramatization by my colleague from O'Donnell Nacarado. I am responsible as an owner, representative, as an architect, and I have liabilities too. And they are not as dramatic as my colleague overstated here.
I don't think that Mr. Sinali, what he said is about his liability really is before your purview. But what I will sum up and say this: 3 civil engineers have looked at the building. All have deemed it unsafe and in need of great, significant repairs. And this is heading down the path of Church of the Assumption and repeating what has been going on 5 years of a vacant property that continues to deteriorate in condition because nobody has the money to do what must be done, and that is the position that the parish is in right now from a public safety and financial standpoint. Thank you.
So, other comments? Specifically. You're doing something with your hand.
Waving over. Hal Shermer, I'm actually one of the attorneys on the application. I have been here, but just pushed out into the hall. I wanted to quickly sort of clean up with one of the issues which came up about the ownership of the church and why that's actually important here. It actually does go to the history of ethnic churches along the East Coast, but also specifically in Philadelphia. Throughout history, Catholicism along the East Coast hasn't been represented by churches because these are English colonies, and for many years being Catholic was not allowed. Pennsylvania being founded by Quakers, they got an exemption from that. At the time that you started to have waves of immigrants from Eastern European, you started to see Polish churches, Lithuanian churches, Italian churches, and throughout the 1870s, 1880s, this meeting would be nothing compared to what people were yelling, kicking, and screaming about, because there are people who were building new churches, and they came from locations which had been Catholic for years, and the hierarchy was mostly Irish Catholic, and they were consistently annoyed because the Italians blew all their money for the fates and for fireworks but didn't put a new roof on, or that the Poles were putting out good food but they weren't keeping up with this. So the fact that this church was built, and the actual designation of the ownership in the deed actually represents a compromise of 1880s, 1890s, where the property is held and titled in trust for the congregation. It's essentially a civil law matter for an ecclesiastic question. And there are a whole bunch of different split-off parishes for this. But this is one of the locations where you see immigrants becoming more American. You also see people who are looking at the question of whether or not the church is in charge and what will happen to this property as being a church again is separate from the civil question about ownership, trustees, and other information, which goes back to what do people think in 1884. Right before this church was founded, there was a third Baltimore congregation of bishops, which finally worked out a way to try to standardize ownership. And I'm going to roughly quote, which is: one generation buys and builds, the next generation embellishes, then all of them hold it in trust for those to come, which is essentially your question here.
Okay.
It was too much for him.
I just wanted to make one statement. All the engineers keep saying that the church is in imminent danger of collapsing. Over the past winter, we had how many winter storms? 6 or 7 with close to hurricane force winds. Nothing fell off that building. Nothing. Not even a little pebble. And you're talking 60, 70 mile an hour winds. So I don't think the building's in that bad a shape. The parishioners are allowed to go into the church, but yet the archdiocese has been sending people in there, removing stuff from the church, which they weren't supposed to do to begin with, from canon law. No helmets. They've been sneaking in the back. They've got a trailer out there now even. They keep taking stuff out. Nobody's wearing any kind of special suits. Nobody's wearing any helmets. It's fine for the archdiocese to go in there, but the parishioners are not allowed.
Okay. The trailer belongs to our maintenance man. He usually. Pardon me. The next thing is, at the end of March, Father Joe got a letter from the head of the number 2 man. In other words, you have the Archbishop and then the person in charge of the administrative staff, saying no one was allowed into the church because we had received warning from O'Donnell Nacarado of the dangers inside the church. So it's been that way. They said allow no one in. They have come from, and also we've had 3 attempted break-ins. We've had, so I said, let's get some of the more precious stuff out of there. We are storing. It is storage. So that's, besides, I'm the one responsible. I'm the one responsible for it. So I had to take care of it. So I've had it moved. And it's stored. Now, this is what they're saying I'm robbing the church. Pardon?
Yeah, storage in the Boo-Boo books.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. The organ and the Christmas trees and all that other stuff, the kitchen, all that's not in storage, that's in holy name.
Okay, so, Janet Klein wants to make a motion.
We have appreciated everything that everyone has said. We've appreciated everything that everyone has said. We are responsible for the decision about the historic significance of the building. If there is a financial hardship, there is the opportunity to appeal. If you believe that there is danger to people, there are opportunities for city inspections. Our responsibility is to determine the historical importance and significance of the building. Therefore, I move that we, as the designation committee, designates for the Philadelphia Historical Designation Register that the building at 1606, 1600 to 06, and 1608 to 10 be designated historic.
This was, designating, as we said in the last, this is just a recommendation that is non-binding and simply an advisory recommendation to the Philadelphia Historical Commission.
We have to second.
It hasn't happened yet to vote.
Right.
Under the terms of.
Also, to be very clear, there are specific criteria for designation, and they are, it has significant character, interest, or value as part of the development, heritage, or cultural characteristics of the city, commonwealth, or nation, or is associated with the life of a person significant in the past. Second is C. It reflects the environment in an era characterized by a distinctive architectural style.
I'll turn it off.
Is the work of a designer, architect, landscape architect, or designer or engineer whose work has significantly influenced the historical, architectural, economic, social, or cultural development of the city, commonwealth, or nation. That's ACE. H, owing to its unique location or singular physical characteristic, represents an established and familiar visual feature of the neighborhood, community, or city. And J, exemplifies the cultural, political, economic, social, or historical heritage of the community.
I'll second your motion.
Thank you.
Just to emphasize, I know it's already, this is an advisory committee. This is going to be, the recommendation will go to the historical commission.
We haven't voted yet.
And we haven't voted yet. All those in favor? Aye.
Now you can choose.
Oh, okay.
Could you explain the voting process? You said we haven't voted yet.
He did.
What's
He did.
It's done.
It's done. It's over.
Oh, pretty
Thank you.